Early this year, I talked about some of the technical difficulties switching between the two principal Micro Four Thirds camera systems, Olympus and Panasonic. Since then, I've purchased not just one, but several Lumix cameras, so let's talk about them. Between recording and publishing that video, I purchased an infrared modified GX-85. It appears to have a standard 720 nanometer-ish cutoff, and because of the modification, it isn't a great exemplar for things like autofocus or obviously visible light image quality. There are some neat features, and the GX85 would make a great camera for a wide audience of users. It handles nicely with the Panasonic 1235 f2.8, and even with the IR mod, face detect autofocus was quick and precise. Panasonic has some of what I'd call gimmicks, such as face recognition, which allows you to store and tag people or pets, and having prioritized those subjects. It has trouble telling my kids apart and even confuses them with my wife sometimes, but gimmicky or not, the idea is great for someone looking to take family shots in crowded areas, and I'm going to assume that it works better with visible color images. The GX85 is an interesting camera from a marketing perspective, since Panasonic released in 2016 with 3 different designations depending on the market. The GX85 in North America, the GX80 in South America, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, pretty much anywhere that wasn't Japan where it was released as the GX5 Mark II. Now, Panasonic has different lines that describe their form factor, the reflex like G, the video focus GH, and GX. Before 2016, also the GF and the GM lines and the G, GH, GX lines indicated the target audience along the spectrum of amateur, enthusiast, professional, instead of by form factor. Strictly speaking, the GX85 sat below the GX8, although ignoring weather sealing and the older 60 megapixel versus 20 megapixel sensor, it holds its own on the spec sheet, including having some improvements having been the later model, and despite an original release price 2/3 that of the GX8. Also, despite being an enthusiast camera, according to the Panasonic lineup, the GX85 is probably a better experience for casual photographers than the OMD EM10. At this level, users are less likely to run into the limitations that all equipment has running on Panasonic bodies. The Panasonic features like 4K burst and focus bracketing could be nice features for that audience, although their JPEG limitations may dissuade other users. Personally, I didn't like the focus bracketing or refocusing feature, which I found clunky. Despite being 4 years old, the GX85 is still available new in kit form for just under $700 US. The kit comes with a 1232 and 45-100 lens, which is the start of a good combo, but I'd look on the used market for a GX85 body only for $200, at a 1235 2.8 for around $500 more. Update the firmware or splurge on V2 of the lens, and you'll be able to take advantage of dual IS. For another $200, you get the newest GX9, but other than the 20 megapixel sensor from the GX8, the non-weatherproof GX9 looks even less impressive. Although I am told the GX9 has much improved JPEG rendering. The other camera I got recently is the Panasonic BGH-1, and I actually picked up 3 of these, and have been using them extensively over the past few months. They're clearly in the video-centric GH line, and are the first in the new subline of box GH cameras. They support power over Ethernet, Cinema 4K, 10-bit long GOP, and 10-bit intraframe, anamorphic recording if you're into that, full-size HDMI out, and I generally love the configurability, even little things like showing the shutter speed either as absolute, like 1/47.9 of a second, or relative, like 180 degrees. You could put them in a rig, but I've mostly had them mounted below rails or on tripods. Again, the flexible mounting options basically let you mount it anywhere, although the top sockets run the risk of blocking any hot-shoe accessory like the Panasonic XLR adapter. It also supports gin lock in, timecode in and out, and has 13 stops of dynamic range using Panasonic's V-Log. These are cool little boxes, obviously geared towards video. I've been using them on the last couple of videos, so you might have noticed their biggest drawback: autofocus.
Have they fixed the autofocus? How much better?
The face tracking is pretty good when you're staring at the camera and not moving. Focusing is otherwise slow, and the nature of contrast-based systems mean that even with a lock, it's prone to unexpected racking. Dealing with pandemic isolations, we've had several video calls, and the BGH-1 utterly fails to deal with my 5-year-old running around. Even stopping down the lens. We ended up breaking out the OMD EM1X, which handled it perfectly. There's another issue, and this is where I'm hoping there's still some Lumix ambassador out there watching. Panasonic has software which is supposed to let you control up to a dozen of these. However, 2 of the 3 cameras I have don't seem to work with wired networking, even after restoring factory defaults, switching ports that are all connected using power over Ethernet, and even trying static settings. Only 1 of the 3 devices seem to actually be talking to the network, regardless of how many of the cameras I've plugged in. I left the support ticket with Panasonic, got an automated response that someone would respond in 1 to 2 days. I followed up a week later, and after 10 more weeks, I've not heard anything. That doesn't exactly instill confidence in the Lumix brand. For all of Panasonic's focus on videos, I'm surprised at the frustration of the depth from defocus autofocus system, specifically during video, when compared to both the Olympus OMD EM1X and the Canon R6, or even my iPhone X, which I used in last year's video. The system is supposedly based on the same generation technology that's used in the full-frame L-mount. More recently, Panasonic has announced a follow-up to its well-regarded GH5 and video-centric GH5S, the latter of which is actually very similar spec to the BGH-1. On paper, there doesn't seem to be much difference in the new Mark II version of the GH5, but it'll be interesting to see what, if any, improvements Panasonic is making to the AF system, although it sounds like it's going to be the same system as in the BGH-1 and the S1.
So, Sean, what camera are you using right now for your autofocus?
That's the BGH-1
Okay,
I've
so
been
that's the
using it
autofocus-
for a year. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Well,
the
not a year,
autofocus that will be in the GH5 Mark II and the GH5S and the G9.
The GH5 Mark II also adds DCI 4K at 60 frames per second, or 6K anamorphic at 30 frames per second, both in 10-bit vlog. At $1,700, the GH5 Mark II looks like an improved, cheaper BGH-1 in a compact weather-sealed rig that doesn't support PoE, or SDI, or timecode. Basically, the BGH-1 makes a great fixed camera, and the GH5 Mark II is going to be better if you need mobility. And it looks like a good complement, quite honestly. The GH6 details are sparse, but Panasonic did acknowledge that it will have a new sensor, capable of DCI 4K 60 frames per second at 422 compared to 420 on the GH5 Mark II. It's going to have 120 frames per second in 10-bit 4K and 60 frames per second in 10-bit 5.7K. It's pretty cool to see that 60 frames per second, 5.7K, and a 2500-ish camera available later this
Absolutely,
year.
2500.
The GH5 Mark II should be shipping in the next 2 months. My only real concern with Lumix right now is the service and support story, which, if you're investing into a system, becomes increasingly important. I even signed up for the base red level of their professional services, which didn't seem to offer any additional support or escalation methods. I've heard people vent frustration about needing to send cameras back to Japan with Panasonic, but I'm pretty sure I'm missing something here, since they must have at least reached a person. If you can live with the AF quirks, if you can live within the limitations of the depth from defocus system, which mostly works fine for talking head videos or for stills photography, I like these cameras. I'm not planning on replacing my R6 or my EM1X, but I'm generally happy with the shooting experience from the Lumix cameras. And the GX-85 would be a cheaper carry alternative if I didn't have my Leicas. While the OMD M1s are the best value at the upper end of the market, the GX-85 is my take for the best value with a full warranty in the segment below that. The Lumix brand is clearly one in which I don't have as much experience as some of you. So let me know what your experience has been. Do you have a secret sauce for getting through to support? Let me know. Till next time.